Week 6, Differentiating for Language and Higher Order Cognition. The overview of this week is first a review of the course. We're going to think about connections between language and higher order cognition, which are obviously the two areas that we've been talking about over the last 6 weeks. One of the places that you'll have an opportunity to start doing that is in Dr. Craig Pullman's video posted on the Moodle page, where he talks specifically about the way these two constructs are interrelated and the way they might interact in the classroom. And also we'll be working more specifically for differentiating for language and higher order cognition. What can activities look like for students? And this will occur in both of the assignments for this week. First, in your part 4 of your lesson plan assignment, where you'll have an opportunity to describe the particular modifications and changes to the lesson that you presented to support students who might be struggling with language or higher order cognition. And also in the discussion forum this week, where you'll have a chance to interact and discuss with your peers about particular challenges students might have in one or both of these constructs and the particular strategies and ideas that all of you are bringing to support students and their learning. We're including this slide in this mini lecture this week because we really want to revisit the overall objectives for this course, the objectives that have driven our decisions around the particular tasks we've assigned, the discussions that we've led in the Collaborate sessions, and the way that we've been thinking about introducing the content of language and higher order cognition as it's laid out in the neurodevelopmental framework, and then thinking about the way that the neurodevelopmental framework and these two constructs in particular can help us really think closely about student learning in the classroom and the lessons that we teach. So I encourage you, after you listen to this mini lecture, to go back and download these slides and then read these objectives again. Now these objectives are available in the syllabus that all of you already have, but I think they're a really interesting way to kind of close out this 6 weeks of this year-long course and think about what it is that you may have gained in terms of knowledge about these constructs and the ways these constructs emerge, occur, and interact with student learning in the classroom. Now this next slide, this one here, this depth of knowledge levels and the question that's kind of placed on the right here. We placed this slide this week as a way to start thinking about ways to practice using, playing with, and being flexible about this knowledge of language and higher order cognition as they're interrelated with students and in the classroom. So if you take a look at the question on the right, it says, how are language and higher order cognition interrelated in the demands of activities at each of these levels? And thinking about this closely will support you, hopefully, this week in the discussion forum that you'll see, and also in designing the modifications and accommodations and writing up the reflection on the ways that you've chosen to alter your lesson plan for part 4 of the lesson plan assignment. So after you've listened to the mini lecture, you can go back and look really closely at the features of this graphic and the explanation and kind of more specific definitions at the bottom. And basically what it does is we encourage you to think about how are language and higher order cognition interrelated. So if we think about these level 1 activities, for example, performing routine procedures like measuring length, or using punctuation marks correctly, it's really helpful to think about what are the built-in language demands for a student attempting to complete that kind of task. That, in terms of the depth of knowledge level, is a level 1, but it certainly places demands on students' higher order cognition. Are there ways as teachers that we can separate what students are being asked to do so that we can understand where it is that they may struggle most? What aspects of measuring length involve language? What aspects of measuring length involve higher order cognition? Are there ways that we can support students by bypassing some of the language demands so that they have access to what they need to think about and the way they need to think about measurement in order to complete that task? On the flip side, are there ways that we can make the demands of that task in terms of higher order thinking more clear for students who are struggling a language? If we think about the kinds of activities that are involved in level 2 in the depth of knowledge framework, we could think about something like solving routine multiple step problems. In what ways are students needing to rely upon language in order to access the idea of multi-step problems, how the steps come together to solve a particular problem, and the way those procedures are making sense for them in terms of their understanding at a higher order level of what it means to solve a problem. Moving into the deeper levels, we might think about something like supporting ideas with details and examples. Now, in order to support an idea with a detail or example, there's a lot involved in that task. And I see that many of us in this class have been thinking about this, because I've seen it reflected in lesson plans and in your analyses thus far in the course. So for a student to complete that, to support their ideas with details and examples, there's a lot they need to know. They need to know what a detail is, which is language-based but also involves higher order thinking. They need to think of an example, perhaps from a text, which relies upon language in order to communicate that, but is not completely living within language. Identifying an example is a higher order task. A student needs to be able to hold the idea they're looking for, look for an example that would represent that, and then communicate that example through language. That's a quite complex task for students, and for students who are demonstrating struggle in being able to complete that task, thinking about the distinction as well as the connections between language and higher order cognition can really help figure out the ways that students would best benefit from supports and which supports would be of most use for particular students. And finally, an example from level 4 would be to analyze and synthesize information from multiple sources. Now, something we've also talked quite a bit about are the demands of the Common Core approaches to teaching built into those standards. And synthesizing information in multiple sources is something that is worked into those standards at all levels and across content areas. So then unpacking, what does it really take to synthesize information across texts and across sources? Well, again, clearly there's going to be information that must be synthesized in language and communicated most often through language. But the task itself of synthesizing is mostly a higher order task. Taking the information gathered from multiple sources, looking for patterns, commonalities, ways to compare those pieces of information, and then communicating what you find about that places demands on both of these constructs that are very difficult to tease apart, but are important to think about the ways they can be teased apart. The reason being because that can help us identify which particular strategies will support students in being able to complete these kinds of assignments and in being able to synthesize. So for a student who really struggles with language, if you're synthesizing across multiple texts, it might be helpful to think about ways to summarize or pull out the key pieces of information from that text in a less language-heavy way. Are there pictorial representations that could help? Are there video examples that a student might be able to look at, really understand, and master so that then they can think about ways to compare without being burdened by decoding, comprehending, and synthesizing text in a very language-based way? By offloading and offsetting some of those demands placed upon students' use of language, they might then have greater access to that higher order thinking that is involved in synthesizing. And then again, for students to share and communicate what they're understanding and synthesizing, we can start to think about whether or not it makes the most sense for a student struggling with language to communicate that through language, or if there might be other ways to represent their knowledge. Would a Venn diagram be a more useful way for the student to show what they understand across text and what's common and what's not, as opposed to writing an essay? Would it make sense for students to enact a conversation as opposed to needing to do a written response? Are there graphic representations that would support their ways of sharing that knowledge with peers and with teachers as opposed to speaking or as opposed to writing? It's this way of thinking about the interaction between language and higher order cognition and the opportunities for supporting students in one or both of those areas so that they have access to grade level standards and understandings that is the purpose of our unpacking these demands and looking for strategies in this course. So again, I highly encourage you to download these slides and look very closely at this slide in particular this week to help you as you start to look for accommodations, modifications, and changes to the lesson that you've been looking at in the lesson plan assignment for this course. In addition, in the discussion forum this week, I also really encourage you to use the knowledge that your peers in this course are bringing to support you in thinking about ways to make those modifications in your own work. This slide shows the prompts for your discussion forum this week. And this discussion forum is in 3 parts. We do ask you to post 3 initial posts, although you need to post only 1 synthesizing a response post to your peers. Of course, you may post more if you would like, but we require just at least 1. So that would be a minimum total of 4. 1 response to each of these questions for you, and then a synthesis or response to peers post somewhere in the discussion forum. And the reason we've made a larger discussion forum this week is because the specific prompts that we've included give you an opportunity to interact with your peers in this course around ideas for differentiating, modifying, and changing your lesson plans to support student learning in the classroom. And because Part 4 of your lesson plan assignment is also due this week, we're hoping that this discussion forum gives you an opportunity to as a source to get additional ideas for your own thinking. It is a discussion forum, so overall it'll be longer than the quick write. However, for each of these questions, you do not need to post a very, very long response. You could do 100 words or less, or around 100 words for each of these responses if you would like, and then your final synthesis or response post to your peers will be completely acceptable. So here are the 3 prompts. Number 1, what happens when a student conceptualizes an idea well but does not express it well using language? So please think about that, and if you can identify a student you know that has had an issue with that, it would be quite helpful to give specific examples. And you may even want to include an example of a support you designed or seen that would be helpful for a student like this. The next prompt is, how could you help a student strengthen language skills through mental representation? And if you'd like, you're welcome to go back to the information we presented on higher order cognition and mental representation to support your thinking around this. And finally, the third question is, how does difficulty understanding complex language or vocabulary impact attention and memory? And that question is really designed to bring back in some of what you learned in Course 2 and start making connections across multiple constructs so that we can think about the ways they interact to give us a bigger picture or a more developed picture of student learning in the classroom. To think about accommodations and supports for students this week, I also encourage you to look closely at the particular readings posted for this week on the Moodle page that are about differentiation. Those offer lots of ideas for ways to find out about student learning and where they struggle, and for ways to modify or alter the way content is presented or students are asked to represent their thinking in the classroom so that they can gain access to participating with peers and in engaging with the content presented in the classroom. I have really enjoyed my work with everyone in these last 6 weeks. I hope you have fun with this week and really get a chance to play around with your thinking about student learning and teaching in the classroom and enjoy your interactions with peers. I'll see you on Wednesday.